Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with John Wick, who is the creative director of Seventh Sea, and we talked about pirate stories. Pirates are kind of a genre unto themselves, or at least that's what I thought going in. Turns out it's a little more complicated than that, and John shares a bunch of his view on how pirate stories relate to things like swashbuckling stories and sailor stories and even sci-fi and space stories. I'll jump across the interview in just a moment, but first, please remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.
So there are a whole lot of nautical stories, a whole lot of stories, for example, like the Master and Commander series, which is so much fun. There's the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, some of which are better than others, and all of it has to do with piracy. When we're talking about piracy, it's all about a bunch of people who are on a boat surrounded by an element that will kill them, right? We cannot survive in water. We need water to survive. We cannot survive in water. And so pirate and sailing stories are all about that. They're about camaraderie. They're about the ship. The ship, when you sail on a ship, and this is one of the first things I was taught when I was on an actual sailing ship, is the first lesson is one hand for you and one hand for the boat. In other words, you are always holding on to the boat on all circumstances, and that's a lot of it is having an adventure in an environment that can kill you easily, without even trying. But it's also about discovery and money and lots of money. But let me tell you something. There is nothing in the world like being on a sailing ship, a tall ship out in the middle of the water where you can't see land, and 300 voices are singing sea shanties. There is nothing in the world like that. It's what James Joyce called sublime. Until you've done it, you have no idea how it feels. And fortunately, the Black Flag Assassin's Creed game touches it. It just touches it, but it's there, right? And really, for me, that's what the interesting thing about sailing, about sailor stories is.
That's such an evocative moment to describe. I have a couple of follow-on questions from that. There's a whole sci-fi angle to space stories, but there's a similarity there. You're surrounded by an environment. Would you say that a space story and a sailing or pirate story are kind of similar?
Absolutely, they carry the same kind of weight. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is Alien, actually, and the reason is because it really pushes how dangerous this job is, and like lots of people get killed. But and that's another part about sailors that was really interesting to me when I started studying them, is the fact that they spend 2 years at sea, 2 years with 300 people, the same 300 people on the same length of boat, right? And I some people are going to complain that I'm not saying ship, but when I was on the ship, the sailors called it a boat, so I'm okay with that. Um, but it's the same thing. It's the sense of everything is dangerous, and they spend 2 years, and they come back richer than they've ever dreamed they could be, and they spend it all in a night, and then go back to sea. Right? Like, there is something so romantic about that, even though it's kind of stupid. But most romantic things are stupid, right? But there's something really, there's two kinds of sea shanties. There's the we're going home, and watch your pocket when you're ashore. Those are the two sea shanties. I once wrote a short story that started with the line, Jarek was only a week at sea, and he knew why sailors always sang about going home. Right? And so there's a whole lot of that in the thing. And that's one of the reasons I love it.
So stories of sailors, of pirates, and you've got this exploration, you've got this camaraderie, you've got this wealth, you've got this relationship with a vessel and the hostile environment. Would you say there's any differences once you dive a little bit deeper between a pirate story specifically and a sailor story specifically?
Yes. So like elements of this time, of the golden age of sail, things like the most valuable treasure you can find are nautical charts. And the reason is because nautical charts at the time are considered state secrets. There is no worldwide globe. There is no universal map that everyone uses. Everyone is sending sailors out to chart things. And if you can capture a ship, and if you do capture a ship, the first thing the captain does is burn the charts, right? So there's that whole sense of that. But also with sailing ships, if you watch Master and Commander, there is a vibe going on there. There's a that is so like us. It's us against everything. And one of the most heartbreaking scenes is when they're in a storm and one of the sails has snapped off, and there's a sailor in the sails and in the mast, and he's dragging the ship down. He's behind the ship, and all of the ropes and everything are still tied. All the lines are still tied to the ship, and that one piece is dragging the entire ship down. And Captain Jack they come out with axes and they start hacking the ropes, and there's only like 2 ropes left, and he's like, if we got to let him go, or everyone's gonna die, right? Heartbreaking stuff, right? And so there's that kind of sense of that, and it really is a real sense of us. It's us, and we're going to get out of this together, right? Pirates, on the other hand. So there's like a lot of different interpretations and things about pirates, and typically role-playing games take the very romantic Robin Hood element of pirates. We only rob from bad guys, right? Historically, not true. But in our game, yes, that's, there are good pirates who hunt down the Atabean Trading Company, who is very villainous, and other things, right? And then there are bad pirates who just hit everybody. But piracy on a pirate ships were one of the first true democracies on the planet, because when you signed up to be on a pirate ship, you signed a charter. You put your name on a charter that had a list of rules. And you're saying, I agree to these rules. And some of the rules were things like, if you lose a hand, you get this extra amount of gold when we score a score, right? If you lose a foot, if you lose an eye, all of these different things. So pirate ships had built-in health insurance, right? That Navy ships did not have, right? Sorry, pal. But the other thing is that the ship, there's a line in Pirates of the Caribbean that is really choice, where Captain Jack, because there's Captain Jack in Pirates, and then there's Captain Jack in Lucky Jack in Master and Commander. But when he says, it's not what a ship is, it's what a ship means. Because you can imagine living in the 17th century. You're probably a peasant. You are probably going to work until you're 30 and die of malnutrition, bad teeth. Your teeth can kill you, or get beaten by bandits, or by the lord of the land, who can just beat you, whatever. It's a miserable existence. You go on a ship and you sign a charter, and it's all us now, right? And for pirates, a ship is freedom. It's freedom from all of that stuff that we had to deal with back in mainland Europe, and in our case, mainland Thea. And it's a place where you can become a king. There's a really great line from the Emerson, Lake and Palmer song Pirates, which is, follow me, boys, and I'll make all of you kings. Right? Oh, that's got some juice in it, right?
I love that. Why I wanted to talk about pirates as a genre is obviously in the context of 7th Sea. What really interests me is that 7th Sea is the pirate TTRPG. And I say that broadly, but you don't always necessarily play as pirates. You could do an entire campaign in Montaigne where you're hanging around the king and it's all intrigue. You never go out in a boat. So can you talk a little bit about that? Do you always have to play pirates? Is it always a pirate story in 7th Sea?
No, but because pirates are a sub-genre of the swashbuckling genre. And that's what 7th Sea is. It's a swashbuckling game. So it is the Three Musketeers. It is the Pirates of the Caribbean. That's swashbuckling. It is Captain Aristide, which is a Spanish series of novels that is really fantastic. And it's all of those things. And Montaigne, for example, in 7th Sea, which is our analog of France, is Alexander Dumas' France. When he was writing about it, we incorporated all of the themes and elements. And my friend Fabian once asked me, he says, John, how are you going to make Montaigne French? And I said, okay, you're going to play a musketeer, and you have sworn upon your life and your honor to protect the king, and the king is a villain. And Fabian was like, that's perfect.
Comparing it to some of the other Chaosium products, then, with this new reframing, would it be fair to say RuneQuest is mythic fantasy, Pendragon is Arthurian fantasy, 7th Sea is swashbuckling fantasy? That's where it sits?
Absolutely. And the system is designed to do that. The system is designed with a very specific cinematic feel to it. You can be one. There is the scene in The Princess Bride where Inigo Montoya is facing the Count Rugen, the man in black, for the first time, the six-fingered man, and he does the prepare to die, and Count Rugen says, kill them all, but keep the Dark One for questioning. And 4 guys race at Inigo, and without breaking eye contact with Count Rugen, he kills them all. Right? And I saw that and I went, I want to do that in our game. And you can. So it's far less about, our game is far less about the importance of success or fail, and much more about what do you choose to succeed at the cost of not succeeding at that. So it's all about choices, because that's what Dumas' novels are about. Dumas' novels are all about duty, honor, and the consequences of choices. And that was what I wanted to be the main focus of the game.
So now that we have this clarification of swashbuckling fantasy, I want to learn a little bit more about the swashbuckling genre rather than necessarily the pirate genre. Could you maybe tell me something that fits in the swashbuckling genre to you that might not immediately be apparent to people who are just hearing about the genre or who don't really know the scope of it?
Yeah, the swashbuckling genre in a weird way is very glib. It's very lighthearted. It's very ho ho ha ha, right? And it's got people doing like Cyrano de Bergerac goes down to the docks to face the 30 men that are there to kill him. And he shows up and he goes, I am cheated. There are not 30 men here. And then he kills them all. Right. Right. So, it has that very romantic element of there are heroes and there are villains, and then there's everybody in between. And they are just like hurdles that the heroes and villains have to overcome to get to each other. And the game is designed that way. If you are a hero, you don't roll to succeed, you roll to see how well you succeeded. There really isn't a failure. I mean, there is. It's incredibly difficult, but there really isn't a failure mechanic in 7th Sea unless the players choose to fail. So let's use the Inigo Montoya example again. He's going to kill the 4 guys, and then he has the duel with Count Rugen, and the player who's playing Inigo says, I lose the duel. And the game rewards him for that, because you're extending the story, you're making the plot more interesting, you're adding a hook to it or a swerve or anything like that. And so that's really what the game is about. It's not about success, but how well do you succeed, and how do you use those successes to like jump around a scene and put out the fire, deal with the the guys that are shooting muskets at you, save the maid who's trapped by the fire, get the blackmail letter from Queen Elaine. It's like all of these things are in this scene. There's like 6 things that you could do, and when you roll, you can do 3 of them. Right? Which ones do you succeed at? And that's where, to me, as a game master, that's really the interesting thing. That's the thing that makes me want to run games, is not, what kind of sword do you carry? Well, a broadsword does a D8, but a long sword does, blah. That's trivial. What's really important to me is when characters are faced with hard choices, and they show who they are by making those choices.
A superhero stories, swashbuckling stories?
I would think so, yeah. I mean, Batman, absolutely. Batman's swinging around and everything. He's a detective. The Sherlock Holmes stories, in a lot of ways, have a lot of that adventure element to them. That whole element to it. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite lines in any story ever is in a Sherlock Holmes story. It's in the Disappearance of Lady Carfax, where the villain is running away and Holmes shouts at Watson. He says, "Watson!" And Watson runs after him because he's the Watson from the stories, who was a doctor in the army and an officer in the army, right? And so the guy's running away and Watson pulls his pistol. He's the only character in the books with a pistol. And he fires it in the air, and the villain stops and turns to him and says, "You won't shoot me." And Watson says, "I served in Her Majesty's army in Africa for 4 years, and I have shot nobler creatures than you." And it's like, I mean, that is a line that you could hear in a Dumas novel, in any, any of those kinds of things. It's about, again, it's about honor, dignity, all those kinds of things, with a whole bunch of jumping around and swinging on the chandelier, kissing the prince or princess of your choice as you grab the thing that you need and swing out the window, crash through the window, and land in the conveniently placed hay bale just outside, which is how the game works. Right? So there's that.
I'm a cynic at heart, so I've got to ask, what's a bad swashbuckling story? Can you think of a modern example, maybe, of something that tried to swashbuckle but didn't quite land? Or maybe something that missed the whole soul of the genre?
Yeah, most of the Pirates of the Caribbean sequels, especially the third one that starts out with everybody getting hanged, including a child. What is that? I don't know. No, I was immediately like, I'm checked out. This is not why I go to see. And Star Wars is swashbuckling, right? Which is why I think Rogue One is a really well-made movie, but it's not a Star Wars movie, because everybody dies. And like my partner Jessica said, you couldn't even save the damn robot. I mean, that is not a swashbuckling story. That's a war story. Great. Do you want to tell war stories in Star Wars? Fantastic. But they're not swashbuckling stories. And I do not watch Star Wars to watch war stories. I watch them. Now, on the other hand, Westerns, American Westerns, have a huge tradition of taking up swashbuckling tropes and playing off of them. So things like the Mandalorian have a huge, they really feel like swashbuckling stories because they feel like Westerns, and the American Western is America's contribution to the swashbuckling genre, where you have big heroes, big villains, they collide, and it's in this once upon a time land, right? Which it's the Old West, which really only lasted like 40 years in American history, if that. But it's this timeless once upon a time place where you can tell all kinds of stories. And because they have that once upon a time feel, you can get away with a lot, right?
That Western note is really good. I really like that idea. Let me ask you, You kind of answered my next question, but I still want to say it anyway because I think it's interesting. I was thinking about how swashbuckling maybe is difficult to collide with other genres. You mentioned the Pirates of the Caribbean example. Comedy can unseat a lot of themes if you put it in. There's some comedy in swashbuckling, and I was about to ask, does it clash? But then I thought of Pulp Cthulhu as you were talking, which is basically the swashbuckling cosmic horror. So is swashbuckling an overpowering flavor?
Well, I guess it can be. I mean, you can do anything too much, right? If the heroes always succeed at everything they do, you don't have a swashbuckling hero. You've got what I hesitate to use the term because it's misused so often, is that you have a Mary Sue story where everyone loves me. I never make mistakes. And when I do, everyone forgives me. And all the big characters in the story are in love with me. And everything is perfect. And everything is handed to me. Right. And I'm better at everybody's job than everyone else, which is where the Mary Sue character came from. In Star Trek is a character who would come onto the ship, flies the ship better than Sulu, commands the ship better than Kirk, outplays Spock in a chess game, and everyone falls in love with them. Right. That's a little bit over the top. Because in the end, what you really want in stories is the reason the 4-act structure works so well is because it appeals to our sense of drama. We introduce everybody in Act 1 and introduce what we need to do. Act 2, all of that gets very complicated. Act 3, we find out that the thing that we're supposed to do isn't that thing. And then Act 4 is us improvising to the finish, right? That's how swashbuckling stories work. There's always a hidden threat. The thing that the heroes think they're doing is not what they're doing. And then when they realize it, there's that moment of, all right, well, I guess we got to do this. Right. And that's why those stories are so appealing to us, because we're humans and we like that kind of story that swashbuckling really embraces.
So to finish things off then, the final question. If you're going to be playing tabletop role-playing game, be it 7th Sea or anything else, and you want to bring in more of that swashbuckling, or you want to make sure that you do the swashbuckling in the best way possible, what's 3 tips you'd have for GMs or players to really evoke that genre convention?
There's a recent mechanic. It's not new, but there's a recent mechanic that's come out for a lot of games, which is instead of having hit points, you have conditions. And so, like, one of the conditions is I'm wounded, which means I'm at -1 in everything that I do. I'm heartbroken, which means all my charisma checks are at a penalty. Or I'm emotionally defeated. Right. And so there's all of these conditions you can have: tired, sleepy, hungry, all that kind of stuff. That fits a swashbuckling game better than hit points does. Because it doesn't discourage players from acting, because as soon as you have hit points, you're like, okay, I'm low on hit points, so I really shouldn't do anything dangerous. In 7th Sea, when you lose hit points on the death spiral, you get tougher because you're John McClane from Die Hard. And the more he gets beat up, the tougher he gets. Die Hard is a swashbuckling movie, right? I mean, it's an American action film. That's a swashbuckling movie, right? So incorporate mechanics that when the players are daring and do stupid but brave and selfless things, the game rewards them for it. Because that's something I found out from my Houses of the Blooded game. I wanted to make a game about Shakespearean tragedy. And I was like, how can I convince players to be Hamlet? When after all, they don't want to be Hamlet. They want to be John McClane from Die Hard, right? So I came up with a mechanic that whenever they self-sabotage themselves, because tragedy is when the protagonist is the author of their own demise, whenever they do that, the game rewards them. And they get to narrate it. So when I say, this is the best example in the world. This is the best example. I was running a game at a convention, and it's a regular group that said, "Hey, John, we're a regular group. Can we play?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And they're playing their characters. And one of them, he's like, and his wife tells me he always falls in love with the villain. That's what he does. He just always falls in love with the villain. So that's telling me something as a GM. So I suddenly insert the femme fatale villain, the Lady de Winter villain, right? And the story, at the climax of the story, they're on the parapet on the top of a castle, where there's like on the very, very top of the castle, fencing. And there's a mechanic in 7th Sea where you can change a villain into a hero. And it's a really difficult role. You can do it, but you got to build up to it, right? And he asked me, he said, at the end of the game, can I make this roll? And I'm like, absolutely. So we get all the way up. He's fencing, he gets up on his chair and he starts doing this incredible monologue about, our love is stronger than this, blah, 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 all the good stuff, really good stuff. And I said, excellent, make your roll. And he said, I fail. And I said, and the whole table made this huge sound. Right. And I say, and she disarms your sword. She plunges the sword through your chest and kicks you off of her sword. And you go plummeting off the castle into the waterfall below. Right. Because, of course, it's in the waterfall below because he has to come back. Right. So, I mean, that's a really great example of why swashbuckling works, is because we know we have certainty about certain things. And when they go sideways, we're brokenhearted, but at the same time, it's like, of course that's what happened, right? And because the player gets to narrate it, that's the really important thing. The GM isn't saying what happens to your character. You're saying what happens to your character. And when you have that kind of control, in 7th Sea you do, if you have that kind of control, when you give it to players, they will use it. And they will come up with stuff that, as a GM, because we all know that no plan survives contact with the players, right? If you give the players just a little bit of narrative control, they will surprise you every time.